All right, everybody. I've got another very special guest for you all this week. Everybody, please welcome to the show, T.Y. Lee. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chris. So
I
I'm Lee Taeyeon. Most people just call me T.Y. Lee just to simplify it as most people can't pronounce my name. And I'm the writer and creator of the upcoming graphic novel, Return of the Rooftop Koreans. And I recently wrapped up a Kickstarter campaign for it, which is now in late pledge mode. So if any of you are interested in the comic, be sure to check it out on Kickstarter.
man's a professional, everybody. um, so just so the audience knows, before we recorded, we were talking about your name and pronunciation and everything. So you had said to call you Lee for the interview. So for everybody out there, I'm going to be referring to him as Lee because that's what we talked about ahead of time. But before we jump into any like big conversation, I'd like to hear just your origin story. Like, where along the lines did you fall in love with comics? At what point did you start creating these things? Kind of give us the background of where you come from in there.
So ever since I was a little kid, I've always been, drawn to, comic books, and I've read lots of comic books. So one of the very first comic books I've read was a Korean comic called Hopuri Yeongam, and this is like a Korean comic that's loosely based off of Korean mythology, which is like about a guy who's got like a giant tumor coming out from under his neck, and some demon ends up cutting it off, and that tumor becomes a bag of gold. So he was like rewarded for being humble. And then there was like another guy who also had like a giant tumor, but because he was greedy, the same demon gave him a second large tumor. So this was like the very first comic book that I read, and I felt like wowed by it because I was a little kid, and up until this point, the only books that I've ever read were like picture books for kids, like Clifford and the Very Hungry Caterpillar and stuff like that. So reading Hopuri Yeongam was like it was just different. It was like I've never seen like a book that was done that way. That was like had a story that was told in like a bunch of sequential images. So that was like my first exposure to comic books. And then, as I got older, I started reading Marvel and DC comics, and I've also got into a lot of, Japanese comics, a lot of manga, and some Korean comics, a lot of manhwa. And, eventually when I was in high school, I wanted to like try creating my own comics. So I, decided to like attempt to write and draw a comic in high school. And this comic that I created was like really, really, really bad. And I like kind of drew the whole thing using a ballpoint pen, and it was just like really embarrassingly bad. And the funny thing is, like a few years ago, I was visiting my mother, and I was going through like boxes of stuff, and I actually found these like really old crappy comics that I drew back in high school. And after high school, I mostly focused on like a corporate career, and I didn't really have much opportunities to be creative. And one day, like during the COVID-19 pandemic, I kind of like got the idea of trying to make another comic book, but this time I would only write it instead of drawing it, and I would like hire an artist to draw it, and this would be like a professional attempt at creating a comic. And then in 2022, I actually began working on a script, and I came up with this idea for a graphic novel called Return of the Rooftop Koreans. And I hired like artists in Chile to draw the comic, and I hired a colorist from Indonesia to color it. And this comic is now 100% fully done, and it was recently launched on Kickstarter a few months ago. So this is like my first real professional attempt at comics, and I do plan on creating more comic books in the future, and I'm actually currently scripting my second graphic novel right now. So that's a pretty good summary about my history with comics.
There's a few things I'd love to pull at because something that I like to talk about on the show is different cultures that we may not see in our comic sphere. And you brought up one there, which is, I don't think a lot of people, and myself included, I'll throw my own ignorance in here, Korean comics. So first, that first Korean comic you got, was that in Korean or were those translated back then?
So yeah, that was actually in Korean. So this was like, so basically when my dad was visiting South Korea, he actually like brought back like souvenirs from his trip, and that book, Hopefully Youngam, was one of the books that he brought back, and that was like my first exposure to comics.
Have you seen, because I know we talk a lot about manga and its kind of explosion in America right now and how everybody is reading that stuff. How different is the Korean scene from that or even American comics?
I think there's definitely like some differences between Korean comics and manga and American comics, because with a lot of like currently right now in Korea, the way most people consume comics is through web comics. Like printed comics, there's still a thing in South Korea, but most people prefer web comics. And I think a lot of that has to do with like the really lax piracy laws. Like, South Korea's kind of notorious for lots of piracy. People don't really buy movies or video games there. Everything is just downloaded illegally. So web comics is kind of like a way to mitigate around that, and that's just kind of how people consume comics in South Korea. I think like the main differences between like a Korean manga versus a Japanese manga is that the vast majority of like Korean comics are in color, while most Japanese manga is in black and white. And another thing is that the way the Korean language is read, it's read from left to right, kind of like English and a lot of Latin languages. Whereas with Japan, it's the opposite. It's from like right to left. So like like I'm sure you've seen like the mangas, they open like in reverse. So Korean, like if you ever seen like a printed version of a Korean comic, they're generally open similar to how like American comics open. And another thing about Korean comics, a lot of Korean entertainment in general, is that especially in the early days, like I'm talking like way back in like the 60s, 70s, one of the primary consumers of like Korean comics were actually American soldiers stationed in South Korea. So a lot of Korean comics were kind of like designed to cater to Western tastes. So if you like read Korean comics, you'll notice that they seem more Westernized compared to Japanese manga, and that kind of carries over. And also, I don't know if you ever like seen any Korean texts. You probably noticed that like a lot of Korean texts, they use Latin punctuation marks like periods, quotation marks, commas. I don't know if you ever noticed that.
Yes, I have actually.
Yeah, but like Korean text generally has like Latin punctuation marks, and that kind of like started in the 1950s. So the Korean language as a whole has become more westernized over time, and because of that, it's like a lot easier to localize a Korean comic to English than it would be to localize like a Japanese manga to English. So I think that is like one of the main reasons why Korean comics are becoming more popular. And so that's kind of what's going on with like Korean comics.
So it sounds to me like the Korean War and the American Korean occupation has been kind of a influence on the media over there, or at least the comics that are coming out of there.
Yeah, like I feel like, especially because like way back then, like I mean, like thinking back to like the 50s, 60s, 70s, like South Korea was like very, very, very poor compared to how South Korea is right now, and the people who had all the money were essentially soldiers stationed in bases in South Korea. Like they're the ones who had all the money. So a lot of like early Korean comics back then were kind of like designed to cater to
Yeah.
American soldiers on these bases. So that's kind of like how like the Korean comic book industry was like strongly inspired by like the West.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see over time that we're now seeing, at least from my point of view, which is a fairly limited point of view from this subject, but it seems like there is their own kind of style in terms of their media that's starting to really break out in America too. I mean, K-pop is huge. They just had that movie on Netflix that was gigantic, and I think of Squid Games, I believe was a Korean show as well. So it's been very interesting to watch all that come over. And then I actually, as you were talking, was thinking about it, and there was one Korean comic that I'm aware of. I have not read it yet, but the book Solo Leveling I know is really big in that manga sphere as well. Yeah, so that eventually, I mean, that's all very interesting, but I would love to talk a little bit more about your book, since that's really why you're here. So we've got Return of the Rooftop Koreans. I think a great place to start the conversation would be like, what is this book all about?
Familiar with like the 1992 LA riots and the story of the Rooftop Koreans?
I'm not familiar with that particular part of the story, no.
So, but are you familiar with like the like what happened with the LA riots back in 1992?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically my comic book is like strongly inspired by that. So it's strongly inspired by the 1992 LA riots, and a lot of people may not have heard of the story of the Rooftop Koreans, but it is a true story, and maybe you've seen like internet memes out there regarding the Rooftop Koreans. And basically during the 1992 LA riots, many Korean American small business owners, they stood on the rooftops of their stores while holding guns to kind of like deter rioters and looters from coming after their businesses, because obviously the LAPD, they were overwhelmed and they could not protect all of LA. So there's like a lot of iconic photos of the Rooftop Koreans, and over time they kind of like become like this internet meme. And the story about the Rooftop Koreans, it always like really stuck with me, because back in 1992 I was like really, really young. I was just a kid, so I wasn't like familiar with the story of the Rooftop Koreans back when it was actually happening, but I learned more about it as I got older, and I always found this story to be intriguing and interesting. So I want to like create a graphic novel that kind of captured the essence of the Rooftop Koreans, but kind of rather than like like telling like a historically accurate story that is true to history, I decided to try to like writing more of a original story that's inspired by the 1992 LA riots and the story of the Rooftop Koreans. So it's kind of like a story that takes place during the present. So that's why I kind of called it the Return of the Rooftop Koreans. Like if the LA riots were to happen again, what would happen? So that's kind of what my graphic novel is about.
And so you said it during modern times. Is it also going to be set during in LA?
So yeah, it's definitely set in LA, and there are like some flashbacks that go back to 1992 LA riots, but the vast majority of the story takes place in present day LA.
Okay. And I'm interested to know just decisions that people make when they're creating. You went with an original graphic novel. Was there any particular reason you decided to go straight into 148-page graphic novel as opposed to like splitting it into issues and kind of delving at the story slowly?
Yeah, there's definitely some reasons behind that. Like I would say, one, I personally find like the whole process of like packing things into boxes and mailing them out to be like an absolute pain. And I do want to point out that many years ago, I used to like sell Pokemon cards online, and I was not a scalper. I was actually a legitimate distributor. I actually like had a contract with MJ Holdings, which is a distribution company for Pokemon cards. So I would buy Pokemon cards from them in bulk and then resell them online. So again, I was not, a scalper, but one thing that I absolutely hated about that was like packing up, Pokemon cards and putting them in boxes and mailing them out. Like I just absolutely hate that process. Like there's nothing I hate more than doing that. And think about so if I were to like do things in issues of like 20 to 30 pages, that would mean that I would have to spend like lots of time bagging and boarding books and putting them in Gemini mailers and mailing them out. And I just, again, I really hate that process. So I figured, why not just go with a full completed graphic novel rather than doing everything in issues. So this way I only have to like, pack books and ship them out one time rather than having to do it like, 5 times. So that's the main reason why I wanted to like go with a graphic novel. And another reason is like I kind of like the way the story is told. Like I feel like it just doesn't work as well if it's like divided into issues because like I feel like the way the story is told, it has to like be done in a graphic novel format. Like people have to like consume the whole thing from beginning to end. So that's another reason. So, and me personally, I'm not like a big floppy guy. Like I prefer to like wait until like the omnibus or like there's a trade paperback that I can buy. Like that's kind of how I prefer to read comics. I kind of like to read comics, kind of like binge watching shows on like Netflix. Like I don't like to like watch one episode at a time. I like to like watch the entire season in one setting. So I feel like with comic books personally, I like to like read the trade paperback and read like all 6 issues in like one setting. So that's also another reason why I decided to like go with a graphic novel from the onset.
Yeah, I'm turning more into that kind of a reader as well. I still get my floppies, but yeah, the graphic novel format is becoming much more intriguing as I get older. I think one thing when it comes to books like this is one thing I think of when I'm reading like manga or any United Kingdom books, English books, stuff like that, is the differences in the world that I grew up in, being in New York State, United States, and then seeing some of the things that people throw in there as part of their cultures to kind of learn through my entertainment. With this book, did you try any of that with like your upbringing, your family values, your Korean heritage? Can we expect anything like that in the book?
Yeah, I definitely include some of that in the book. Obviously, so a little backstory about me is that so my parents are first generation Korean American immigrants. They both came here in, I'll say, sometime during the mid 80s. As for me, I'm a first generation Korean American. I was born in the States. However, I was raised in a Korean American family, and both of my parents, they were not very good at speaking English. So my childhood was like very different compared to most people's childhoods. And as a kid, I was exposed to a lot of like Korean media. Like as I mentioned earlier, I read the Korean graphic novel Hopefully Youngum, and obviously the vast majority of non-Korean Americans have never read that book or even heard of it. So I was definitely like exposed to very different books growing up, and also like the stories that my parents would tell me growing up as a child were very different. Like I was told like stories about like Korean mythology, like the story of the Gumiho. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I'm assuming you're not.
You can assume not on most of this. I actually, as far as your culture goes, I'm very ignorant on a lot of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the Gumiho is kind of like a fox demon, and this fox demon, when a man looks at this fox demon, he sees a beautiful woman. However, only females are able to see the Gumiho in its true form, and when a female sees the Gumiho, she sees an obvious fox demon. The thing about Gumihos is that they feed off of the souls of men, and that's kind of what they do. They'll trick a man into falling in love and then eat his soul. So that was like a story that was told to me by my mother, and like these are kind of like the stories I was told growing up, rather than being told like other stories like the ugly duckling. Like that's something I learned when I was in preschool, and so definitely my upbringing was very different. And also growing up, my I would say mostly my mother, she was very religious. She was like a member of an evangelical Methodist church. So I remember that we were like the only Koreans there, and everyone else was white. So it's kind of like a very interesting dynamic. And I remember going to like a Methodist school where I was literally the only non-white kid there. So that was different. And no, none of these kids were like racist or anything like that. So lucky for me, I did not experience that. And being like the only Korean American attending this evangelical Methodist school, I was kind of like an outsider. So some of that kind of reflects in my book, The Return of the Rooftop Koreans, because going back to the story of the Rooftop Koreans back in 1992, like back in 1992, the way LA was LA was a lot more I guess like segregated. It wasn't like as integrated as it is today. Like back in the day, like every ethnic group, they just kept to themselves. Like blacks kept to themselves, Hispanics kept to themselves, and then there were many Korean Americans in Koreatown who kept to themselves, and their interactions with people outside of their own race were very limited. As back in the day, many Korean Americans were kind of treated as like outsiders, and they're like in a foreign land. So I definitely like put some of that in my comic, because at the end of the day, my book is kind of like about the East meets the West, and I kind of like wanted that to also reflect in the art styles. So like the artist that I chose, he has like both Eastern and Western influences in his art. So I kind of wanted him to like, include some of that like Eastern, stylings to his art, but also like some Western stylings to his art. So the book Return of the Rooftop Koreans kind of like combines Western and Eastern art. And the story is essentially about like the East meets the West. So my upbringing definitely did like help shape the story, and there are like some moments in the book that were like inspired by real events. Like I also want to point out that back during the 1992 LA riots, my uncle, he owned a very small liquor store, which did end up getting looted, and there were some. So like he showed up at the liquor store and he saw that someone spray painted the words "Go back to China" on the wall of his liquor store. Obviously, he's not Chinese, so I did like also include that in my book as well. So there were like certain events that actually did happen that I kind of included in my book. So it was definitely strongly inspired and shaped by my upbringing.
I definitely love to hear that because it's always great to have some good media that you love and can just be escapism and all that. But it's nice when people like yourself sneak in a little education as well and all those. And when I'm hearing about, I mean, you mentioned the story about the demon fox. Have you ever thought of for future titles, maybe like taking some of these stories you grew up with and making them into stories for the future?
Yeah, I definitely thought about that. And, the thing about Korean mythology is that, it's just not well known. Most people,
Yeah.
especially in the U.S., they're only like familiar with like Greek mythology and Norse mythology, and like Korean mythology is very foreign, but I think there are some like similarities. Like I definitely noticed that like it's kind of interesting, but if you look at like all mythologies between different cultures, there's like a lot of similarities. Like I know this could sound weird, but like, did you know that in like Sumerian mythology, there is like a story about a guy who was born to a virgin mother, and he was like the Messiah, and eventually he ascended to heaven. So like, there's like a lot of like similar stories across various cultures, and when I was talking about the Gamiho earlier, I know that in Chinese mythology, they also have like a fox demon as well, and so does Japanese mythology. I believe in Japanese mythology, the fox demon is called a Kyubi or something like that. And
Yeah, the nine-tailed fox.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And in Korean mythology, there's also like a creature called the Imyeonjo, which is basically the Korean version of like a harpy. So it's basically kind of like a bird creature or like a bird demon, but it has like a human face, which kind of sounds just like the harpies from Greek mythology. So I find that like really interesting that like there's like a lot of overlaps between like the mythologies of like different cultures. So yeah, I would definitely love to like bring some like Korean mythology, to the comic book world and kind of like help introduce like Western audiences to like Korean mythology.
Yeah, that's always fascinating because it makes me think when you see the similarities between different cultures and their stories, where these stories come from. Because, like, how could somebody from Korea come up with a similar story to somebody, like, basically all the way across the world, at least at that time as we knew it, in Europe? Like, it's insane to me that that could happen. And I also think of, at least in Western culture, and I know like for me, Japanese culture is more prevalent in my life than any other Asian cultures. But you think of the Journey to the West, and then in China, you think of Romancing of the Three Kingdoms, and these stories that have made their way over here and had cultural influence over here as well. I mean, the Monkey King alone with Dragon Ball Z is just like huge. So I could see an audience out there for these stories if it was available to them, if they were something that they could kind of dive into. Because I don't think that anybody dives into those stories until they see the media that's inspired by those stories. So I think that'd be a really cool move for you to do in the future. But for now, you've got this great story. And I guess my next question is really like you said you came with a story. You did all this stuff. How did you meet your creative team and kind of pick them to be a part of the book and the journey with this?
Yeah, that's a good one. So when I first started working on like my book, I was kind of like clueless as to like how do I start, like what's the next step. Like that to me was like something that I just didn't really know what to do. So once I was done with my script, the first thing I did was I decided, the best thing to do was to hire an editor. Obviously, it's beneficial to hire an editor to, look over my script and see if there's like any mistakes or plot holes. And I found an editor on Reedsy named Matt, and he also like gave me a lot of guidance on like next steps, like how to like like find an artist, like what should you be looking for, like what how should you vet them. And like I know one thing that he pointed out is like when finding an artist you have to like make sure that they have like endurance, because there's like a lot of artists out there that you know they don't have the endurance to do like a bunch of pages every single week. Like they may not really like have experience with like doing sequential art. Like maybe they only do like pinups or covers. So when it came to finding an artist, I think I found my artist on Instagram, I believe. So I kind of like looked, like there's a ton of different comic book artists on Instagram, and I kind of was looking for like someone who had experience doing sequential art for like graphic novels, and I found a guy in Chile who had previously illustrated like a web comic, and he also illustrated like a graphic novel that was printed. So and I really loved his style. Like I loved how he had like both Eastern and Western influences in his style, and that like really just caught my eye. And another thing I really loved about his style is that I looked at like his comics that he previously drew, and unlike most artists that don't really like think too much about like body language or facial expressions, like this is something that he like prioritized. Like he did a very good job with like body language, facial expressions, and really like telling a story through the characters' faces. And that like really caught my eye about his style, and that's the main reason why I decided to hire him. So after I hired him, I found like a colorist on, I think it was Facebook, and I found this guy from Indonesia who is like a very, very talented colorist. He has a lot of published works, but most of them are in Indonesia. I know he's worked on some American comics as well, and his style just like really stood out to me because he used a lot of like bright contrasting colors, and I felt like his colors would work well with the line art. After that, I found like a guy to letter my comic, and once that was all done, I kind of like did like I found like a printer in China to print the book. Obviously, I found that printing books in the U.S. are just like way too expensive, and especially if you want to like print like a hardcover book in the U.S., that's just not possible with like a small print run. It's just too expensive. So once I reached out to this printer in China, they gave me like this print template to use. So I kind of did like all the pre-press work myself, and kind of assemble the comic book together, and then I sent it over to them, and they did send me over a proof, I believe like 2 weeks ago, which looked good. So it's currently being printed, and hopefully the books should be ready sometime in December.
And I see you got a bunch of cover artists to do some work for you too, some really cool cover art. I'm assuming you found them along the way when you were looking for line artists?
Yeah, so, obviously, when it comes to covers, people do judge a book by its covers. So I feel like when it comes to covers, it's important to hire the best of the best and to invest a lot of money into covers. And when it came to finding cover artists, I really wanted to like get like cover artists that have like very different styles from one another. I didn't like want like two cover artists with like a similar art style, because I wanted to like have variety. And I reached out to I would say like roughly around a dozen or so cover artists, and obviously like half of them did not respond, but the other half did. And I ultimately decided to like just go with like 4 different Korean artists, because at the end of the day, Return of the Rooftop Koreans is like a a Korean story that's strongly inspired by Korean culture and Korean American history. So I felt it was fitting to have like Korean cover artists for the book, and the first cover A was done by a guy named Kim Dong-ho. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before.
No, can't say I have.
Yeah, he's like a well-respected artist in South Korea. He was a student of Kim Jong-gi. I'm assuming you're familiar with Kim Jong-gi. So yeah,
Yes.
he's a Kim Jong-gi student, and like Kim Jong-gi, he does like a lot of live drawing type of things, and I really loved his art, and I felt like his art would like really work as a cover for the book. And I also hired like another guy named Yoon Sung-han, and he's done like lots of covers for Marvel. And then another guy I hired was a guy named Takso, and he's actually so he mostly comes from like a video game background. He's done like a lot of concept art for video games, and I really loved his style. So I've been like a fan of his work for a while. I've been like following him for years, and so I decided to hire him. And then for the cover D, I hired a guy named King Sung-min, and he's pretty much a college student. He's very young, very he doesn't really like have as much experience as the other guys, but I really loved his like art style. It's like very unique, so I hired him to do cover D, which I found was actually like the most popular cover. Like that's the cover that people love the most. So the cover that people love the most came from the guy with the least experience. And then for the final cover, I had the main artist who did the interior art from Chile do that cover, and that cover was also really cool and really nice. And I feel like the covers I had were like really nice. I'm assuming you've seen the covers.
Yeah, and as you were talking, you were basically saying what I was thinking as I was looking back through them, because the A cover is just this great like art piece. It almost has like a watercolory-esque feel to it, but just gives this like cool vibe to it. I thought the cover B felt like a manga cover, or an Eastern inspired cover, which would fit kind of the audience that we're looking for. And then the cover C, as soon as you said video games, I was like, dude, this looks like it looks like the cover of the new Battlefield or something. Like that's what came to mind when I saw it. And then yeah, cover D you said was the most popular. I could see why. It has such a, even though it's a Korean artist, it has such a Western feel to it. It feels like the poster to a big action movie that you'd see here in the States. Like it's such a cool cover. I think all four of them are great. All five of them are great, but I could see why D is the most popular, at least in this sphere. I think he did a great job picking artists for these covers.
Yeah, I've been like following all those guys for like years, so I kind of like had them in mind for like a while.
Yeah, and I think anybody out there that's making a comic, I mean, any of these guys would be great picks. But I could see Kim Sung-min being more popular in the space moving forward, just because it's such a stunning cover, especially for something like this kind of book, an action title. And if you don't mind, what I would love to kind of get into, because I feel like through this conversation, I haven't gotten the idea from you that you're, as they put, anti-woke, but your name for your publishing arm is Anti-Woke Books. Why did you go with that name, and what does it mean to you?
So the reason why I went with that name is that I felt like a lot of comic books these days have become very like politicized, and yes, I am aware that comics have always been political. Like I remember reading like a comic from like that was like created roughly around when World War II was going on, and it was basically World War II propaganda, and obviously, comics have always been political, but I feel like comics are best when there's like no politics, because oftentimes like politics, they kind of like distract from the story. Like there might be and oftentimes like the politics, they seem like shoehorned in, like they don't really like add to the story. Sometimes like political stories do work, like in the case of like George Orwell's Animal Farm and 1984. Like those stories do work because they are like political in nature, like they're meant to be political. But like other stories that like there was like one book that I was reading, it was like a thriller that like it was a spy thriller, and I don't know why, but for some bizarre reason the author decided to like include like a paragraph about Jeffrey Epstein for some bizarre reason, even though it had nothing to do with the novel. And I just thought that was like weird. Like I feel like when people like add like random politics to a comic, kind of like destroys the immersion. So with like anti-woke books, I want to like focus on being like non-political, or if it is political, the politics would actually like serve the story rather than being like tacked on. So that was kind of like the message that I wanted to create with obviously anti-woke books. And something I learned over the years is that like almost everyone I talk to has no idea what anti-woke means or what woke even means. The person who yeah, like
My next question was going to be, what is your definition of woke? So
yeah, like the person who designed the anti-woke books logo, like she didn't even know what it meant. Like she thought it meant that you don't like being awake, so you're like a vampire at night. So she thought it had something to do with that. And the original logo she designed did kind of like have this like vampire-ish feel, but
that's awesome.
that's the thing. Like they just didn't really understand it. So I found that a lot of people just have no idea what anti-woke or woke means. But for me, like woke means like just like adding in like unnecessary politics. And I wouldn't really say it's like necessarily left wing, because there are like people on the right who are also woke as well. Like I see it on like both sides. Like I see like people on the left calling everyone racist, and I see people on the right calling everyone anti-Semitic. So it's like woke means more like shoehorning politics into something that doesn't really need to be there. Like that's kind of how I see woke.
Okay. I think, because I tend to stay away from those monikers just because, like you kind of said there, they're so muddied at this point that I don't think anybody really knows what they mean at this point. Like, because I hear from lefty people like, oh, it just means you don't like people of color. Obviously, you're not one of those people, as you would be considered a person of color. And then I hear, so on, so on. But for me, I think what a lot of people are pushing back on, and you kind of said it there, was not the politics in the book, but the lazy nature of the politics in the book. So like you said, just shoehorning it in, even though it shouldn't be there, as opposed to building your story with it in mind, which is where like Animal Farm. Animal Farm is a very political book, but it's not shoehorned in a way that doesn't make sense to the story being told. And I think that's what people are really pushing out against, is lazy writing and bad writing. And that current, but that's cool. I'm glad we got that out, because I think it's a hot issue, and I wonder if that moniker have you gotten any negative reaction from calling your publishing arm that?
Few though, I did get like a few, but mostly the reaction is they have no idea what it means, and people think, like as I mentioned, anti-woke means that you hate being awake and you love to sleep. Like that's kind of what a lot of people think it means. But I did get like some negative reactions, and obviously some were not so nice and some were more nice. Like I did have some like people who were kind of nice and were trying to like explain to me that maybe I don't understand what woke is, and they were like very polite and nice about it. And other people like called me names, and they would say that you're racist, but at the same time, they'll also tell me to go back to China, which kind of makes them the racist. So
Yeah, I shouldn't laugh at that comment, but at the same time, the ignorance of the person saying that is funny. And I think two quick things to end on, because I know we do have to wrap up, but I love that you have a crowdfunding code of ethics here. And a lot of things I think we can all kind of agree, things that I talk about all the time with Kickstarter campaigns. Do you want to mention that real quick, what your kind of your code of ethics for crowdfunding is?
yeah, so obviously I've backed a lot of crowdfunded books on both Indiegogo and Kickstarter, and the truth is, about 1/3 of the books I do actually get on time. Another third are late, and then another third, I don't know what's going on. Like, it seems like I've been like ghosted. Like they took the money and they ran away and vanished. So obviously, I've been burned by many crowdfunding campaigns, and so have many others. And I feel like these bad faith actors are kind of like hurting crowdfunding as a whole. Like, because obviously, like, if somebody gets burned too many times, they're going to stop backing crowdfunding projects at all. Like, they're going to be like, I'm done. I'm not going to back anymore. And there are lots of people like that. And as for me, these days, I'm a lot more cautious about like what projects I back, because I've been burned so many times. So obviously, like, when it comes to backing books, I like to like see, like, is this the creator's first book, and did they successfully fulfill their first book, and was it late, was it on time, and like, these are things that I personally look at. And I feel that that because like so many people have been burned, they're like hesitant to back a project. So like, when it came to Return of the Rooftop Koreans, I created that crowdfunding code of ethics, kind of like make it clear to people that this is a safe investment, that you're not going to get burned. Other grifters out there that will burn you. So my crowdfunding code of ethics, it consists of like 6 core principles, and the first one is respecting the backer, because there are lots of like creators out there that when you message them, you will never hear anything back from them. And so I wanted to make it clear that if you message us, you will get a response soon, and we will also respect you, and we won't treat you like crap. So the second point was excellent customer service, making sure that people's concerns are addressed. So I have this guarantee that if somebody sends a inquiry, they will get a response within 24 hours. And then my third principle is project delivery guarantee, meaning that if you back this project, you will get the book. And in the rare event that somehow you don't get the book, like let's say I don't
a shipping error happens.
Yeah.
Which happens. Yeah.
You are able to get a 100% full refund, and all refund requests will be accepted until the moment of shipping. And there are lots of like people on like Kickstarter and Indiegogo that do not do refunds at all. Like, they have this sorry, no refunds policy. And I even had like a guy tell me to F off after asking for a refund, and his project is like 5 years late. And another
little feeling there.
Yeah. Another principle that I have is that I only launch campaigns for books that are 100% done. And I'm noticing that this is becoming a trend on Kickstarter. Like, there's a lot more books on Kickstarter that are 100% done now than there were like years ago. Like, Kickstarter is slowly starting to move away from being like a crowdfunding platform to a pre-order platform. And I think a lot of this has to do with people being fed up with being burned all the time. And another thing that I'm also doing is that my fifth principle is commitment to the current campaign. That means that we don't launch another campaign until the current campaign is fulfilled. And I've noticed that lots of people treat crowdfunding like some sort of Ponzi scheme where they'll like constantly launch new campaign after new campaign after new campaign, and they'll use like the funds from the new campaign to finance the old campaign. So basically it's a Ponzi scheme. So I don't want to like do that. And then my last principle is responsible use of funds, because I've noticed that lots of people, they will like misappropriate funds. And I don't know if you're familiar with Peachy Printer, but they were like this company that was like crowdfunding a 3D printer on Kickstarter, and one of the co-founders ended up using that money to buy a house. And that really pissed me off. And I backed that campaign, and I still have not gotten my rewards yet. So I don't know what's going on with that. And I also haven't gotten a refund either. So, I want to be like, I'm a strong believer that all the money that it's raised through Kickstarter has to like go to the Kickstarter project. Like it's for the project. Like using it for yourself to, buy a car or buy a PlayStation is, in my opinion, wrong. So that's kind of why I developed like this code of ethics, like so that this way people, will feel confident in backing one of my books and know that they're not going to get ripped off or screwed over.
Yeah, and I think all of those things are things that I've talked about in the past with Kickstarter that we need to see more of. And I think we have seen more of, but there are still a few bad actors out there, as you said. The last thing I really want to know is you talked a little bit about making the logo for your publishing arm. Who did the logo for the book? Because I have to say, they fucking nailed it. Like, it's so good and it's so eye-popping that it really lets the book stand out.
Yeah, I really love that logo. So the logo was created by Wahaj Ahmed Siddiqui, and I can, like, I know it's kind of hard to spell, but I can like type that out and send that to you. But he's a really talented graphic designer. I believe he's from Pakistan, and most of the work he does, I believe, is in like corporate logos. He doesn't really do a lot of comic book logos, but I really love his like style, and he did like a really good job with the Return of the Rooftop Koreans logo.
Yes, definitely. So, T.Y., it's been a blast just chatting with you. I definitely love to do it more. But before we wrap up completely, A, anything else you want to say about the project? And then B, where can people follow you? Do you have social media that you're on, or do you have a mailing list or something that people can follow you further?
So for those of you who want to follow me, just look up Anti-Woke Books on either X, Instagram, or Facebook. And my brother-in-law actually runs those accounts. I don't really do a lot of social media. And also, if you're interested in getting the book, just go to Kickstarter or Indiegogo and just type up the words Return of the Rooftop Koreans, and late pledges are available, so people are still able to back the book, and we anticipate fulfilling the book in December. So I don't know if it'll be, if I can guarantee you'll be getting the book before Christmas, but I'm confident you will get the books in December. So yeah.
That's a tough shipping period for the United States, at least. I worked at FedEx for a while, and that Christmas period is rough. So everybody out there watching, listening, check out the show notes down below. I'll have the links to the Kickstarter and the Indiegogo, so you can go check those out and back the project, check it out. And then I'll have all the social media down there below as well. T.Y., it's been just such an absolute pleasure chatting with you tonight. And I look forward to do it again sometime, man. And just best of luck with the book moving forward.
All right. Thanks again for having me on, Chris. It's been great talking with you. I really enjoyed this conversation.